Alright, so we are doing a scope install on a Henry H009, which is the steel 3030 model. Might be able to make it out on the barrel there. We'll see. Not a big deal. We just did a review, quick first impression of the video. Obviously, super high quality. We love it. Here we go. So things we are going to be installing. As we briefly talked about in the video, these models are drilled and tapped on the receiver to accommodate the Weaver 63B mount. Okay, so it comes with all its screws there. We've got some basic scope, 1-inch scope rings. And we are putting a Bushnell trophy. Which way are we going? There we go. 2:7 magnification, 36 millimeter objective, 1-inch rings, simple multi-X or that standard crosshair there. Customer decided on the 2:7, or we talked about it based off the ranges that we see in the Northeast here of taking shots for hunting. They're not as far as you're going to see out in the Midwest. So a lot of times that closer magnification is going to be much more beneficial and useful for your average hunter. You know, even 1X you can take solid shots out to 100 yards with, even with the iron sights if your eyes are still good. So I'll be walking through the steps for a good scope install, some of the tools, and doing a lot of it in time lapse just to save time, but just taking a break here and there to talk about some of the tools that are being used. So first thing, this Tipton gun vise, super handy, keeping everything locked in place and level, using a where are we going? This is weird. Wheeler. Okay, we got a Wheeler level. Funny. From the scope installation toolkit, I was just double check that receiver is level to start. It's weird, I never seen that happen. My level bubble burst and it was multiple bubbles, now it's one bubble again. So we have a level receiver to start. It comes with another level, and this goes on your scope when you have that all set up, so you get everything level to each other. So first thing that we're going to be doing is removing the drilled and tapped placeholder screws. We always make sure, get yourself a nice screwdriver kit. Make sure to use a size that fits exactly. We don't want to be undersized. We don't want to be oversized, obviously. That blade had a little wiggle. This one still has a little wiggle. We want to try to get a blade that's going to totally fill that slot in all the directions. Perfect. All right. So, like I said, take these out real quick, and then we'll look at the scope mount itself, or the mount. Okay, so simple removal of those screws, obviously. I was just set them aside. This gun vise has nice little recessed compartments to keep little parts in while you're working on stuff. I always save those for the customer if they choose to take that scope and mount off in the future, and they can replug those holes. Scope mount, simple, right? I'll get these screws out. Oop. So we just got some very basic screws. We'll put them in our little small part stitch in a separate one. We'll get out that Loctite. Always Loctite. Always Loctite those scope mounts, or anything on your gun that isn't supposed to move. Pretty simple. So there's multiple mounting holes on here, you'll just simply place this over your receiver and see where that's going to line up best. There we go. Okay. So on the Henrys, it's the 2-hole side facing forward. You may or may not want to just wipe down the receiver. You know, if this is a brand new gun, it's not going to have, or it shouldn't have, a lot of any sort of corrosion or schmutz on it. So let's do a blade test fit again. Okay, I need a bigger blade, so I'll get that. And we'll be screwing these in, adding Loctite. What I always do is I do a test fit first to make sure everything lines up, all the threads are good. And then I'll add the Loctite, and we'll get out our torque wrench as well. All right, so as you may or may not have been able to observe in the time lapse, I put in those screws, those 4 screws for the test fitting. Everything fits right. And then how I do it, I go back one at a time. I take out the first one, put the thread locker on there, put it back in. So that way the screws hold it and hold the whole mount in place as you're going back and thread locking them all. So now we're going to go back through, grab that same blade that fit perfectly, and we've got our fat wrench. It's a torque wrench screwdriver, basically. Really easy to adjust. It's got that dial gauge on there, turning it to the right, increasing that torque. This is in foot-pounds. When it comes to sights, scopes, everything like that, having everything torqued to the same setting is just going to be really beneficial for accuracy overall. So if something is torqued, and when we get to the scope rings, that'll be even more important. Having everything torqued to the same settings is going to be wildly beneficial. If those rings are torqued unequally, it can be twisting that scope and thus giving you an inaccurate sight picture. So as you probably just heard, just like any torque wrench, when you get to the torque setting, it releases tension and gives you that little click. So that was just 20 foot-pounds. I'm just going to go back through, give it 25. I'll probably go up to 30, 35. As you can see, this is not very difficult at all. All right. 30 foot-pounds. There we go. You got to be careful, as you saw me slip. These screws are not always the strongest steel. That actually slipped and messed up that screw head a little bit. Fortunately, that isn't really a problem. It's only a minor mar. You won't even be able to see it once the rings are in place. So, you know, like I said, this scope mount is only a few dollars. I mean, I think it's around $10 probably. So you get what you pay for in a certain way, but this is the only thing that this is drilled and tapped for. All right, so the next thing is going to be putting on rings. How this works, usually what you do is take your bottom rings, put those on first. Then we're going to do a check and make sure everything is in alignment, and then mount from there. So we're going to switch back to time lapse. Somebody cut themselves along the way. I don't know. I was like, whoa, where'd that come from? All right. So just like with the mount, always test fitting first. Everything's lined up with those slots in the rail. Just give it finger tight, you know, a little bit of tension on there. And now we're going to do our quick alignment check. And that's done with these beefy tools. So each of these sit in those rings, and we make sure those points line up perfectly. If they didn't, we can look for a tension adjustment, or we may have to lap, or basically sand, the rings to be level with each other. Or not necessarily level, but aligned. And we have perfect alignment right off the bat. So you really only need to do that with separate scope rings, but I always do a check even with a more a modern mount that you usually see on ARs where they're one whole unit, both rings. They could have some issues from the factory, and you might need to lap them with the lapping tool to be true to each other. So right here, these were already true to each other. So now what we're going to do, just like we already did, go back in, thread lock our nuts, get our biggest blade we got on there, and tighten those down real good there. All right, everything is still nice and true. Now it's time to pop on that level, our receiver. Make sure everything is level. Okay. I'll take out our scope. Now, with the Bushnell, okay, some people, and I'll stop. There we go. Now they're not crinkling. Some people may say, oh, well, this is a cheap scope. I call it a budget scope. Okay? Bushnell, in my experience, are excellent scopes for the money. Okay? We get a lot of value, solid quality. Okay? This is what we're looking at for this user. Didn't have a ton of money to spend, but didn't want to cheap out either. Like I said, I always recommend Bushnell scopes for that budget-minded hunter or shooter. They do have more expensive ones as well, but this trophy line or the banner line are going to be that budget-level scope for many people. Okay, so what I'm doing right here is getting my levels in place, and you make that bubble level, those two levels, match up. Okay, so those levels match up. Now what I'm gonna describe what I'm gonna do and then do it in time lapse. When we have our rings, okay, our top parts of our rings, we want to tighten things in basically a star pattern. First, using just a hand screwdriver. We don't need the wrench out yet, but we want to make sure we have the same spacing all around. So what I mean by a star pattern, it's not really a star, but if you go front, side, rear, skip diagonal. So tighten there, tighten there, tighten here, tighten there. So we cinch it down equally all around. So drawing that scope into tension equally, making sure it's remaining level, even tension on the whole thing. Okay, and we'll torque it down to probably again between 20 and 30 foot-pounds, just maybe a little bit more, looking at how that is, ensuring that we have very close to the same amount of gap around those rings. Okay, so now again we got our levels on there. We'll switch over to time lapse and get. All right, so that is all torqued in. We are level all around. And before, I forgot to mention, you may have obviously noticed, I took off the scope ring, or the adjustment cover, and leveled to the cover. Not the cover, to the actual dial. These covers are just aluminum typically, and it might not be truly level with the scope body itself. Another thing you may or may not have noticed me checking the clearance with that front sight. Normally what I do is I just leave it on. Again, this is removable. You can still slide it out even with the scope in place if the end user decides to take this off. There's a little screw there, pop out the spring, it just comes right out. I leave it on there as long as it's not in the way, again, for the end user to decide for themselves. So this scope, again, we got 2 to 4x adjustment. Not 4x, 7x. It's a little stiff to start, but again, that 2x, good for really up close. We got a fully adjustable eyepiece for focus. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pick this up. It'll be off camera, take it out of its lock, and just kind of give that visual inspection now that everything is level. That final, ooh, that's nice. That's really nice, actually. We got good eye relief. Everything is good. We got enough space to pull back that hammer. Henry does make a thumb piece that mounts here, so it'll stick out to the side. However, you can see my thumb has plenty of space. I have a little bit bigger than average hands, but I don't have bare paws, so that fits just right for me. This duplex, so those crosshairs look perfect in there. And the next step is going to be laser bore sighting, and we'll talk about that next. Alright, so that's back in place. Laser bore sighting, I'll get that tool real quick. This is another, there's several different types out there. This is a universal one. This is, again, a Wheeler engineering tool, where we just have a C123A battery that goes in there. It's just a laser. It has a magnet on the end. What I do, so it goes on the end of your muzzle, and then I measure as close as I can from all the sides, basically 4 sides, to make sure your muzzle's centered in there. We choose a target. We just take a target out across as far as we can, usually about 20 some odd yards, maybe to start, and get the projected dot to line up with, or rather get your crosshairs to line up with the projected dot. And that's going to, as they say, get you on paper. So it's not going to be absolutely perfect right off the bat. I mean, it's going to be really close. Every gun that I've ever laser bore sighted for my own personal use, as soon as I take it to the range and actually test fire it, it works. See, there's the laser. All right, just like any other laser pointer. So that'll go on there. I'll bore sight that in, and we'll do a quick little wrap up. All right, so we're bore sighted in there. That's as simple as getting that dot out there, obviously on the end of the muzzle, and then just adjusting your windage and elevation knobs till it's where you want it to be. What I normally do, again, like I said, just based off of space limitations, is take basically the furthest distance I can, which is about 20 yards, thereabouts, and then get the windage dialed in exactly, so the dot is perfectly on the vertical crosshair. Okay, so on that line, that's going to be the most important one to start, and then usually I'm going to be putting that dot a little bit higher than dead center. That way the user can put this out to maybe 50 yards and take that shot, and maybe it's a little high. It depends on what the end user, where they want their zero to be. Some people like a 50 yards, some people like 100 yards, 200, whatever it is you happen to be doing with that gun. What is your point of use? So again, getting that windage, that left to right, getting that centered is the most important to start. That's going to get you on paper faster and sooner, and then just dial in that elevation as you're shooting, as you're testing those loads. The other reason, again, with the elevation, different bullet weights, different loads, that's going to change that elevation. It's also going to change the windage, but getting that windage dialed in first is going to make it much easier for that end user to get this thing dialed in right where they want it to be. So that is the basics of getting a scope, standard scope installation on your regular old rifle. I will have another scope mount video coming up sometime in the near future on a one-piece unit, which if you look in the playlist, I think it's in the gear reviews, we've got that Aero Precision mount for competition rifle, so it's a little bit different process, but that'll be up as well. So there's the basic process there. If you want, you can do this without these specific tools, but these specific tools are going to give you the best mounting that you can get right off the bat. Everything ready to go, ready for hunting, ready for target, whatever it happens to be. So again, any questions, comments, concerns, you can leave them below, or there's my non-band-aid finger, there it is, below down there. You can email me directly as well. All that information is in the description below. Thanks for watching and have a great rest of your day.